Today's experience is that of a sister who was shown the outcome of the U.S. election and what become of the winner after the election. It's so terrible. Kindly stay to the end and get prepared for what is to come. My name is Bida Rubin. I had this experience on the 26th of October 2024. Being a nursing student, I'd come to expect a full schedule, but this day was something else. The morning kicked off with a rush to meet my instructor's expectations, moving between patient rooms and learning new skills on the spot. One of the first patients I helped was an elderly man recovering from surgery. By mid-morning, I was helping in the emergency room where the pace was relentless. A young mother had rushed in with her son, a boy no older than 5, clutching his arm after a bad fall. Lunchtime came and went with no chance to sit down. My next task was assisting with a patient transfer, a middle-aged man in recovery from a severe accident. By the time my shift ended, it was all I could do to make it out of the hospital and head home. The day had taken everything out of me, but even in my exhaustion, I felt this quiet nudge, an urge to sing, a strange feeling, considering how drained I was. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and began humming softly, letting a familiar praise song slip from my lips. The melody filled the room, and soon I found myself fully singing, feeling lighter with each word. As I sang, a sense of calm washed over me, almost like a mist settling around me, cool and gentle. It felt like a blanket of peace draped over my tired soul, lifting the weight of the day and filling me with an indescribable stillness. In that moment, the weariness faded, replaced by a sense of warmth and presence that I could hardly explain. One moment, I was standing in my kitchen, lost in the gentle peace of worship. The next, I felt myself slipping away from everything familiar. It was as if a veil had lifted and suddenly, I was no longer in my home. I found myself in a vast, open stadium, its sheer size and intensity unlike anything I'd ever seen. The colors were vibrant, yet there was an otherworldly stillness to the place, as if it existed in a reality outside of my own. Ahead of me, on the field, 2 figures stood poised at the starting line of a track. Both wore athletic gear, but their uniforms bore images, one of Donald Trump and the other of Kamala Harris. Though I couldn't see their faces clearly, I felt I knew who they represented. The race began, the figure with Donald Trump's image surged forward, moving with a speed and confidence that seemed almost unnatural. Kamala's representative took off as well, but there was a noticeable difference in their paces. Trump's figure moved swiftly, gaining ground with every stride, while Kamala's figure struggled to keep up, lagging further and further behind. As the race continued, the distance between them grew wider, making it clear that Trump's representative would cross the finish line first. The crowd around me erupted in cheers, their voices filling the stadium with a thunderous roar. I could feel their energy and excitement. Just as the cheers reached their peak, an uncanny silence fell over the stadium. The shift was sudden, eerie, as if someone had turned off the sound in an instant. The bright lights dimmed, and the once celebratory atmosphere grew tense, somber. Slowly, the scene began to change, morphing around me, until I realized I was no longer standing in a stadium but in what looked like an election polling station. Rows of booths appeared, and people lined up with serious expressions, casting their votes in a scene that felt heavy with purpose. After what felt like hours of waiting, a voice echoed through the room, announcing that Donald Trump had won the election. As I stood there, trying to grasp what had just happened, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. He was dressed in brilliant white, a stark contrast to the dim surroundings. His presence felt both calming and commanding, as if he carried a weight of knowledge that was beyond my understanding. I felt drawn to him, compelled to listen. He took my hand gently, his grip warm and reassuring. "What you have witnessed is a reflection of America's fate concerning the upcoming election," he said, his voice steady yet filled with urgency. The race you saw represents more than just a competition, it symbolizes the direction in which the nation is heading. Donald Trump may have won in this vision, but there are deeper things at stake. His words resonated within me, sending chills down my spine. You must understand, he continued, that while victories can seem clear-cut, they often hide complexities beneath the surface. America is at a crossroads, facing decisions that will affect not just its citizens but the world. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Policies will be implemented that may seem beneficial on the surface, but will lead to serious consequences. You must be aware of these issues. As I absorbed the warning from the man in white, I couldn't shake the gravity of what he had revealed. 3 key policies began to form in my mind, each one more troubling than the last, each holding the potential to cause devastating ripples across the nation and beyond. The first policy he mentioned was the imposition of restrictions on religious practices, particularly targeting Christian expressions in public life. I envisioned churches facing mounting pressures to conform to secular norms, where the freedom to speak about faith openly could be stifled. Laws that once protected the right to worship freely could become tools of censorship, limiting what pastors could preach or what activities could be held within church walls. As I pictured it, families would gather less frequently to worship, fearing repercussions for their beliefs. Youth groups and Bible studies would dwindle as uncertainty about legality cast a shadow over their gatherings. I could see Christians hesitating to speak out on moral issues, their voices silenced by a growing fear of backlash. This shift would not only fracture communities but also challenge the foundation of hope that faith provides in difficult times. The second policy involved a move toward isolationism, pulling back from global alliances and cooperation. I imagined the consequences of America withdrawing from treaties, neglecting partnerships that had taken decades to build. The once familiar exchange of ideas and resources with other countries would become fraught with tension, leaving allies feeling abandoned. I could envision nations growing wary, their trust in America eroding. Important conversations on climate change, human rights, and global health would stall as the focus turned inward, leaving those in need without support. As trade agreements fell apart and economic ties weakened, I saw people struggling, businesses suffering, and families facing uncertainty about their futures. The world would become a more dangerous place, and the isolation would only deepen the divides between nations, creating a breeding ground for conflict. The third policy revolved around significant economic shifts that would impact Americans directly. I saw a push for deregulation that aimed to stimulate growth but instead led to unforeseen disasters. Industries would be allowed to operate with less oversight, putting profits over people. As companies cut corners in their quest for wealth, I envisioned environmental catastrophes resulting from negligence, leaving communities devastated by pollution and natural disasters. With the economy struggling to keep pace, I imagined rising unemployment rates and the widening gap between the rich and the poor. The middle class, already stretched thin, would face even more difficulties, forcing families into hardship and despair. The weight of these economic burdens would fall heavily on the shoulders of those least equipped to bear them, causing stress and anxiety that could lead to a breakdown of social cohesion. As the vision began to fade, the man in white turned to me, his gaze intense and penetrating, cutting through the uncertainty clouding my mind. He revealed the imperative to share the message he had imparted. It was crucial for believers to pray for Trump and for America, as the road ahead would be riddled with challenges. He warned that without fervent prayer, the consequences could be dire. He gestured toward the cities I had previously seen, now cast in shadow by the policies I had witnessed. He explained that neglecting this call to prayer would not only lead to suffering from these policies but also result in a loss of influence within the very fabric of society. Christians were urged to intercede for their leaders, seeking wisdom, strength, and discernment to navigate the of governance. Without this support, those in power might falter, potentially making decisions that could lead to devastation. The weight of his words pressed heavily upon me, illuminating the realization that our inaction could have catastrophic repercussions. I was struck by the vision of a world where believers were silenced, their voices overwhelmed by confusion and despair. If prayer were neglected, the fabric of faith that held communities together could unravel, leading to division and isolation among Christians. The spiritual warfare unfolding in the unseen realm would spill over into the visible world, leaving churches struggling to withstand the tide of adversity. His expression grew graver as he continued. He explained that the consequences of our inaction would ripple far beyond America's borders. Nations that looked to the United States for leadership and hope could find themselves lost, adrift without the guiding light of faith. This impact would extend to believers in other countries as well, who would also bear the burdens of a weakened America, a nation that had once stood as a beacon of hope and strength for the world. He leaned closer, underscoring his point. He emphasized that prayer was a powerful tool capable of shifting the course of history. It was not simply a suggestion, it was an absolute necessity. When believers united in seeking God's face, they unlocked the potential for change, revival, and healing. Without this collective effort, the consequences would be profound, affecting us spiritually, socially, and economically. As I processed his words, I felt an urgency swell within me. The call to prayer transcended personal responsibility. It was a collective charge for every believer to rise and intercede for their nation, their leaders, and the world at large. The stakes had never been higher, and the time for action was upon us. I understood that the future rested in the hands of those who would dare to pray, who would believe in the possibility of change, and who would stand in the gap for what was to come. As I stood in the presence of the man in white, his message resonated deeply within me, urging me to take action. He revealed that this was not merely a warning, it was a clarion call for believers to rise up and intercede for the nation. The time had come to lift our voices in prayer, seeking God's guidance and intervention in America's affairs. I felt a profound sense of urgency, understanding that our prayers mattered more than I had previously realized. He emphasized the transformative power of prayer, explaining that it could shift atmospheres, break chains, and bring about changes that seem impossible. He reminded me that as Christians, we are not just spectators in this world, we are called to be warriors, standing in the gap for our leaders and our nation. As he gestured toward the horizon, I sensed he was envisioning the future that lay ahead. He spoke of the heavy burden of leadership and how those in power needed wisdom, strength, and discernment to navigate their complex roles. I understood that our prayers could support them, guiding their decisions to align with God's will. He encouraged me to intercede not only for President Trump but for all leaders, that they might be guided by divine insight rather than mere human agendas. The urgency of the moment intensified with each revelation. He explained that our prayers were not simply about asking for help, they were invitations for God to enter into our situations. Our prayers could create a channel for His will to be done and for His plans to unfold in a way that glorified Him. I realized the significance of collective prayer. When believers unite in faith, the atmosphere shifts, and the enemy is pushed back. He paused, allowing the weight of his message to settle in. He acknowledged that the challenges ahead would not be easy but assured me that they could be overcome through prayer. He urged us to encourage one another, to gather in groups, and to create spaces where prayer took precedence. This was the moment to stand firm, to be bold in our faith, and to seek the face of God with fervor and determination. As he continued, hope stirred within me. He reminded me that prayer is a necessity, not a last resort. It serves as the lifeline connecting us to God's heart, allowing His power to flow through us. It was at this point I came back to myself. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for staying to the end of this experience. Save a soul by sharing this video with your friends and families, so that they will be saved from the path of hell. Subscribe to our channel if you have not, to remain updated whenever we share another experience that is being sent to us. Thank you.